And today we're joined by Tyler Bishop with Ezoic. Tyler, welcome aboard.
I've been a publisher for basically as long as I'd been in my career. I used to run jiu-jitsu websites.
Today we're going to end up landing on first-party data.
Cookies were, not really designed for advertising. Third-party cookies were the invention of, the big tech platforms, namely Google. And they were sold to advertisers that were buying digital ads.
Is this just another thing like third-party cookies where I've got to get on board, but it's going to be years and years before it has an impact on my business as a publisher?
The future of advertising, if you don't have cookies, how are you going to target people? Publishers are way behind the demand in terms of, the advertisers that want to buy this sort of inventory.
How does someone take these concepts and move forward in their publishing business?
You can basically make that email address like...
All right, welcome back to Niche Pursuits podcast. My name is Jared Bauman, and today we're joined by Tyler Bishop with Ezoic. Tyler, welcome aboard.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to it. I've listened to the show before.
It's great to have you. You and I are kind of in each other's backyard here. I've met up with you guys over at the Ezoic headquarters in years past and whatnot, but we're doing this one virtual today, doing this interview virtually. So I'm excited, though. We're talking about a topic that's very interesting. I'll get into that here in a second, but maybe before we dive into what we're going to go through today, give us some backstory on yourself, maybe a little bit about before Ezoic, maybe even what you've been doing with Ezoic.
Sure. So my backstory is, I guess, if we go way back, I was born in rural Missouri. So I grew up in a town where I had only 60 kids in my graduating class. My mom thought it was important for me to get through there pretty quickly. So I graduated high school when I was really young and went to college in St. Louis and lived there for 15 years with my wife, where I started my first tech company and exited that company after 3 or 4 years. Most people would probably say it was a success. I saw it as years and years of failure and then like a lifeline at the end to get out. And since then I kind of got the mark of being somebody that was young and understood digital marketing really well. And so because of that, I was a part of a lot of organizations that were either bought or acquired, partially through my help for years and years. And I connected with Dwayne LaFleur in 2015, and he had the idea for Ezoic. He basically felt like most of the things that were happening in programmatic or digital advertising were going to eventually be automated. And he was really big on machine learning at the time. And, AI and machine learning are all the rage right now. But I can tell you, it is kind of one of those things that right now I'm like, why didn't everybody care for the last 10 years, And so we applied that sort of methodology to things in ad operations. And I really liked the idea when he had it. I'd been a publisher for basically as long as I'd been in my career. I used to run jiu-jitsu websites. Some of the very first jiu-jitsu websites on the web were mine. And so I liked the concept. It was already a space that I was personally passionate about. And so I helped them start this company when I started, there was 12 of us. And then, at one point, I think over 400. So, this has been a really good business. And I think from the standpoint of looking at advertising is a good business. If you look at all the different types of intermediaries and stuff like that play in there, it's one of the largest industries in the world. It's going to be here for a long time. It's correlated with global GDP, so it keeps going up and up. But now I really spend most of my time thinking about that aspect of it, which is, the future, because I think the future of digital, as much as any others, is uncertain. If you look at the way that AI and LLMs have displanted jobs and things like that over the last 6 months, tech is very heavily affected. And I think, technology goes hand in hand with the digital web. And, you ask yourself the question of what is the digital web? Where is the digital web going to be in 5 or 6 years? And I think that affects our customers a lot, affects everybody that I'm sure listens to this show. And that's where I spend most of my time now, is thinking about how are we going to help people that are dependent on the web in the future.
Hey, Jared here. So if your website earns revenue through ads, you're probably leaving money on the table. Advertisers now bid highest on ad spaces powered by first-party data. So emails and phone numbers that you probably already collect. ezID by Ezoic makes tapping into this revenue effortless. Ezoic securely manages your audience data, instantly connecting it to premium advertisers, increasing your earnings, and protecting you from dropping ad rates. So don't miss out on the revenue that you deserve. Visit ezoic.com/EZID and secure your ad revenue future today. Again, that's ezoic.com/EZID. All right, now back to the podcast.
I like how you positioned it as let's talk about the future. Because I think like we could sit here and talk about programmatic ads up to now, and we could fill a whole podcast or more with that. And by the way, I think it'd be really interesting. But we are at that position where a lot of people who are going to be listening to this show are saying the exact thing you just said. Like, hey, what is the future around the digital web, but also around specifically programmatic ads? And then I also wanted to kind of layer in because today we're talking about, we're going to end up landing on first party data and really talking about its future as it relates to these bigger topics. But I think a lot of people are perhaps getting a little tired of hearing about these types of terms. We had the whole third party cookies situation that Google addressed and brought up and then punted and then punted and then punted. And now we're here talking about first party data. Maybe if you could, to get us into today's conversation, talk about that transition and some of what's evolved over the last 5 years or so around this topic of data, cookie data, and then let's move into what we're talking about today as it relates to first party data.
Sure. And you mentioned the historical aspect of advertising on the web. Like I consider myself a little bit of, a historian on the topic. And it's really hard for me to separate sort of like the history of, you mentioned cookies, because I think it's a really great, like, sort of like, like marker for where things have gone and where things like it establishes all the parties at play and sort of gives you a little bit of an idea of the direction. So third-party cookies were, not really designed for advertising originally. People can read up on the history of it, but the thing is third-party cookies were the invention of, the big tech platforms, namely Google, and they were sold to advertisers that were buying digital ads. At the time, I remember this, where digital advertising was a small portion of the overall marketing budget of a lot of like big brands at the time. Like I lived through this sort of like, it's a small portion, maybe not important to, it's the gross majority of now. And advertisers were sold this idea that, like, look, third-party cookies, it's the perfect magic bullet, because it's the people that you want to target, the people that were on your website. Like, they're obviously interested. The old sales training that I remember from in college, I used to sell commercial fitness equipment, and they would always be like, no one walks into an exotic fish store for no reason. They clearly are there for something. And so, that was the pitch to advertisers. This is going to be better than any form of advertising. It's trackable. You're going to love it. And so over the years, what happened was, I would say marketers, their ability to actually target and understand where their audiences were, those muscles that they had, they atrophied, because you just get used to just dumping like I just dump everything into Google and it sorts out where my audience is. And I think, even the most generous people, and I guess like on the Google side would probably tell you, yeah, it's imperfect, because it is. I mean, as somebody that's used these platforms for a long time, they're not as accurate as they were billed to be. So all those things aside, when Apple came along and said, hey, we're going to block this, it was kind of power move a little bit, because you think about it, it's like Google has this sort of like, with Chrome, this really big advantage, because they also have their ad exchange, where basically everybody on the advertising buy and sell side has to use Ad Manager if they want to use Google's ad exchange, where the most competitive sort of bidding for advertising takes place. So what you end up with is, Google controls both like the measurement, tracking, collection of audience data, and then also the market in which advertisers buy, sell, trade ad space. It's a pretty good business. But if all of a sudden you have someone come along that says, hey, that basically the singular source that you're trafficking in, the currency, I guess, we're not going to allow that on our browsers. You really like put a damper on it. And so I think Google was like, look, we need to lead the way in sort of what the next iteration is going to be, because we need people to continue to use our systems, our market. And so, people have been, kind of uh, fed up with a lot of the aspects of Google being able to control everything in that regard. So for them to try to lead the way and, a new standard or a new solution, there weren't a lot of people that were ready to jump on board real fast and support that. And so what you saw was a splintering across the market in terms of like responses and reactions. And what you have now is, you mentioned that kind of will they or won't they sort of, depreciation of cookies. Here's where we're at now: is the gross majority of mobile traffic is the browsers or the devices don't allow third-party cookies. If you're using anything but Chrome as a browser for the most part on desktop, it's not allowing it. So you're seeing a slow depreciation of third-party cookies. They are going to eventually completely go away. Even though Chrome says that they'll support them to some degree, we don't even know if Google's going to own Chrome. So the web has sort of moved on in a lot of ways, but it's been very slow and arduous. And I think there's definitely some asymmetry in terms of which parts of the market have adapted and which parts haven't.
Where does first party data come into play? And a lot of people listening are going to kind of be a little bit familiar with it, maybe from a high level, maybe from a, is this just another thing like third party cookies where I've got to get on board, but it's going to be years and years before it has an impact on my business as a publisher, as a creator?
So I would say yes, it does. When we think about it from the standpoint of take it out advertising from the equation and think about it like this: third party cookies is a way of being able to say, look, the people that visit your site, they've got like a stamp on them, but you're just basically like giving that to somebody else. Like you're not actually collecting that data. And for a long time, you might go, hey, like I don't want to hold on to that data. There's a risk there associated with it. But first party data is data that you directly collect and you maintain. So that data is things like email and phone number. That's the currency that first party data is basically like standardized by. So you think about somebody's email and phone number. That's somebody that's given you that information, given you permission to contact them, advertise to them, whatever. And that information means that, like, we talked about the future of advertising. Well, the future of advertising, if you don't have cookies, how are you going to target people? It seems like contextual is not even going to be a consideration. It that avenue or that route, it doesn't seem like advertisers have been interested at all. And so for first party data, you can kind of look at it as, this is my audience, and I look at it from an sort of like like survival of the publisher perspective, where I look at LLMs gobbling up the internet, whether you ask them to or not, block them, not block them, they'll get it. And you look at sort of like the way that search engines seem to be trending, and things like that. And I go, well, if I have something valuable, I need to maintain my audience regardless of advertising, whatever, because I need to maintain that connection with them. I'm going to have to assume that all these other parties that, have been sort of frenemies for a long time are going to be not acting in my best interest and not going to be somebody that I can depend on. So I'm going to have to sort of self-generate this. Well, if you have their email and phone number, you can at least market your content to them. And if they like your content, you can keep coming back, and things along those lines. Those are things that everybody's familiar with. You can be self-sustaining in that regard. Now, what about the advertising part? Well, if you just turn around and give that audience over to Google, there's no differentiating your audience. You have something valuable now. It's a lot more valuable whenever it's your audience versus your audience gets lumped in with a bunch of others, and people can just pick and choose out of the box which ones they want and which ones they don't. That makes your entire audience less valuable. And so the way that I would look at that is going, okay, so how can I become self-sustaining in revenue? And the answer is that advertisers have kind of figured this out. Like, it's matured quite a bit over the last few years, but they've created a protocol or a system in which the way that ads have traded programmatically with third-party cookies, you can do it with first-party data as well. So you can think of this as automated selling the way that it's always occurred, except instead of you giving your audience to Google and then Google sort of like selling it to advertisers ad hoc, you're basically working directly with advertisers by saying, like, look, I've got first party data, here's what I've got. And then, you put that up there, those people come to a website. Advertisers that also have the same matching first party data, then they would bid on it, according to their campaigns. And, regardless of whatever percentage that Google was taking in there, you're cutting out those middlemen, but you're also seeing from advertisers much higher sort of like bidding, because this is a rarity right now. Publishers are way behind the demand in terms of, the advertisers that want to buy this sort of inventory.
So in essence, I think thinking about it like controlling your user experience and you know for a long time as publishers we've relied on Google and search engines, Facebook, Pinterest, and social media platforms to send us traffic, right?
Right.
And it's always been talked about, hey, build an email list, because then at the very least, you kind of start to take control of your audience rather than relying on a Google to send that. And then we've all experienced the last couple of years of ups and downs, mostly downs. And so it's put more of a focus on like, hey, those who control their audience are winning now in comparison to those who never bothered controlling their audience. How does that analogy relate to first party data as it relates to earning money from advertising, right? Why
Yeah.
is a brand more willing to pay if you have their email address, conceptually speaking, and in practice? And then how does somebody start to shift their mindset into thinking about this if they're driven by an ad revenue model?
I can give you two answers to it. One is the broad sort of like theoretical answer, and then I can give you a real one. I can give you how it works today, at least, or how specific to the how are they making more money. So the kind of like theoretical answer is that in the same way that kind of owning your audience is the gold standard of like traffic, right? Being able to generate your own traffic. It's like the audience has a relationship with you. So like the engagement, the quality there is a lot better. Advertisers see that as well. So one of the things with advertising, especially this was especially true with third-party cookies, is that like, arbitrage was the thing. Being able to like, kind of like buy cheap traffic and make more money off of it than like you spend on kind of driving it to the side. It became, a game of whack-a-mole between all of the platforms to try to, mitigate that as much as possible. But the secret to that strategy is always like jam as many ads in as possible, because who cares about user experience, right? And that's a bad experience for you. It depreciates the whole system, because the idea behind advertising, as somebody that's been an advertiser before, is like, advertising works. Like, so why it's such a big industry. It's like, business that doing great, run some ads. If you can't turn up some business, you might not have a good business, right? So like when I look at it, I'm like, advertising is supposed to work. So you want to advertise to real people. Well, people that have an audience, people come to them, you shouldn't need to jam a bunch of ads in. My kind of pie in the sky dream is that that the world can operate off of one ad network. You just show one ad and that's it. And this is sort of the bridge to that, because one of the things that happens when you can sell your audience and it's exclusive to you, one of the things that can happen is, we've noticed this for a long time, that if you jam a bunch of ads in, all ad bidding is based on historical data. So you've got an ad in the sidebar, you charge a $50 CPM bid floor for it, and people start paying that. Then you put a second, same size ad in the sidebar, it'll get a $50 CPM too, and you're making double the revenue from that, that sidebar. But the problem is that over time, advertisers realize that engagement gets divided too. So like, you'd think uh, there's not going to be more people clicking. You're not getting people that are more interested. All you're doing is you're dividing that attention and that engagement between the two ads. So what happens is you end up with two $25 CPMs in that sidebar over time. But the reverse works as well. So you have two 25s, you take one away, eventually it'll become 50. So the value of a page, the value of an audience is sort of divided a lot of times by the ads, but you have to kind of like work this through in the auction. That's what the machines were really good at. And that's one of the things that we learned. And so one of the things that you can do and have a lot more control over whenever you have your first party data is selling your audience for the right price. Now, I told you I was going to give you the real answer right now. One of the big aspects of this is that, and I guess hypothetical, because this is sort of our theory on it. And I guess I'll share this. I know it's not something that I share at conferences and things like that, just because there is some, like, I guess, in-house sort of proprietary knowledge on it. But I don't doubt that most ad ops professionals probably have some inkling to this. But when you submit bids, especially through these first party data protocols and things like that, there's a lot of different parties. One of the major ones that everybody uses as a partner, they connect to their quote unquote ad stack right now, is Index Exchange. It's one of the larger ones, but there's a bunch, and they accept so many bid requests a minute, a second. It's insane from all the websites across the world, and you can only process so many, so you can only allow so many through. So they have to start limiting what requests they allow through, both on an individual level and then at a macro level. So if you're going, well, a lot of the requests that come in here are just like they're bullshit. Like they're just like low quality. You know, you never know what you're going to get. So if you're going to have to filter, you know, sites that are trafficking in first party data, that's probably a much higher quality overall than third party, you know, whatever. And so those bid requests would go through, and if those bid requests aren't getting filtered and all of them are coming through, you're going to get better bids because you're going to have more competition. And if you know you don't have that and it's causing, you know, you, whether individually or just, you know, time of day, whatever, to get filtered through, that's a lot less competition that's going to bid on your inventory. So I would say it's sort of with the demand that's there for advertisers that want first party data, the market is trying to meet that as much as possible. So you're seeing higher demand, you know, supply demand principle at play there a little bit right now. But yeah, so that's both the theoretical long term sort of like pie in the sky version, and then also like how it's working in practice right now.
So if I were to overly summarize, it sounds like first party data not only is attractive to brands, they're willing to pay more for it, and you potentially could get a higher ad fill and a better CPM through stack exchanges and ad bidding networks.
Yeah, correct. And it's not really dealing with any new ad demand, meaning like ad networks or exchanges that are playing in the pool. The advertise. This is the thing that I think people probably would be surprised to learn. Because let me ask you a question. So like, if you're an advertiser and you're going to run a programmatic campaign, are you going to not use Google? And if you don't have some kind of like weird philosophical like disagreement, probably going to use it, right?
Yeah, yeah, of course. They're the biggest.
Yeah, it's like I can't imagine that Coca-Cola would do that and not put their ads into Google. So if Google is getting almost all the advertisers, like what are these other guys doing? And you know, that was a question that I had like when we started the business. I was like, why do these other guys even exist, you know? And the answer is that they all have different data. So they might even have the same advertisers. So when you might have Coca-Cola bid on your inventory twice, once through Google and once through somebody else. And you go like, why would they do that? But they have to run the campaigns in both. And what happens is that let's say that one of the other players in the pool, like they're associated with Verizon Wireless. Well, the info that's coming to Coca-Cola through Google may just be like, you know, what website you visited. Through Verizon Wireless, they know, you can think about like what your phone carrier might know about you. Maybe they're also your ISP. They have a much deeper fingerprint or profile of who you are, and they might know that you're shopping for a Mercedes, and Google might not know that. And so, like now, you've got these big luxury car brands that are in there bidding for somebody that they wouldn't have bid through Google. So some of these parties in there, they're playing a part. So you're right. It's you're getting a lot more sort of like richness in terms of the demand with first party data because you're maximizing the opportunity to reach all of these different sort of like end actors that are going to be bidding.
So I want to pause for a second. We've gotten really detailed, which I love. By the way, I didn't tell you before we record, but people on this podcast love details. So people
Good.
are gonna love it. But maybe if we could pause and do like a almost like a TLDR for people who are new to advertising and certainly new to programmatic ads. Like in a very, very basic sense, what have you said so far as it relates to first party cookie data for the newbie, for the person who's not a veteran in programmatic advertising,
Sure.
where we're at right now?
So you mentioned the thing earlier about like how like owning your audience, like collect the email, so you know you can maintain that connection. So it's very much a parallel in that like if you can imagine, you know, like this is happening now. It's like traffic is drying up from places like Google, social media, whatever. And so you're going, I need to own my audience so that I can reach them directly and market my content to them. So that sort of like parallels perfectly what's going on in advertising right now, where third-party cookies are depreciating. So, you have to find a new way to sort of like work with these advertisers that want to buy things programmatically. First-party data is sort of your way to reach them outside of these big tech platforms and basically giving away your audience. So in the same way that and it's the same data as well. So it's like the same way that you would, want to collect emails and phone numbers and stuff so that you can market your content to your audience. You want to collect their emails and phone numbers so that you can then work directly with advertisers to, create a self-sustaining business. Really, if you can generate your audience and generate your revenue directly without any other intermediaries, I'd say that's, you've won publishing, like that's the dream.
Perfect. Let's maybe transition a bit and talk about like how does this play out? What does this look like, especially for a publisher who has always maybe paid attention to all the third party cookie drama and all that, but ultimately they're like, hey, the thing I love about programmatic ads is I go work with a company and they help me do all this, and I go back to just being a publisher, right? So I get checks, I sort of pay attention to where the ads are and that sort of thing. But really, the thing I love about the ad model as a publisher is that I'm pretty hands off. So, how does someone take these concepts and move forward in their publishing business? Because it sounds complicated, right?
Yeah. Well, so I would say like this is an area that I'm really passionate about because it's something that I have a really strong value of justice, and publishers in everything advertising related always get the short end of the stick in a lot of different regards, especially over the last decade. And it's because you sit at the end of the chain of how the money flows. So you've got advertisers, and then you've got agencies and networks and exchanges and thousands of different ad tech that sit between where that first dollar goes from the advertiser to when it reaches the publisher, and then ultimately the end customer is the consumer, the person that's going to read the content. Like, it's supposed to be this perfect three-way exchange that's balanced, where advertising subsidizes the cost of content so that users get free content. Everybody wins. It just doesn't work that way. It kind of rolls down. And so
Nice.
because yeah, yeah. So what you end up with is you've got this system now, where the advertising market has plowed ahead. So what this looks like in practice is, so advertisers have created what they call identity protocols, and the way that they work and the way that they sort of like align with a lot of the. We didn't get into the history of the regulatory stuff. To me, it's just so boring. They've done such a bad job with it. It's just, we're not doing anything about CCPA or GDPR. So the result of them is that you need your data that's trafficked across the internet. It needs to be traceable, it needs to be deletable, all this kind of stuff. So how do you do that? Well, the answer to it is that if you hash the emails, so these identity protocols, which you can think of these as sort of like the trade lanes between you and the advertisers. So advertiser has somebody's email and you have it, and you want to basically, they want to target that person. You're like, I got that person. How does that work when the person's on the page? There's these identity protocol providers. The Trade Desk is probably the most significant and one that people might be the most familiar with. Their universal user ID. But you basically, on the publisher side, would have what they call an ad ID. So these different protocols, they use different hash types of email hashing. There's like SHA 126 or whatever, and the various ones. But you want to hash your email, so you think of it as you got your list. Well, this is in your best interest as well, funny enough, because what happens is you hash all the emails. It's not the same thing as encryption, but you can think of it as like encryption. So you basically mix it all up and you create keys for it all. So you've got basically a hash of an email that no one else could figure out, and the advertiser has the other side of it, so that whenever they take these protocols, these trade lanes, they match up when the user's on the page and there's a likely bidder, and they bid. And so the way that works is that you and the advertiser both keep all the user data. So this is, in response to the big tech platforms kind of gobbling up everybody's data and using it for whatever they want for a long period of time, is now if I'm a user and I come to your site and I'm like, hey, I like the podcast, I like what you do, here's my email address, I want you to send me podcasts when they come out. I've given you that permission, and you want to keep it. It's valuable. We know that now. Like, you can sell this directly to advertisers. If somebody else can sell it, it depreciates the value of it. Also, you don't want to give to somebody else because you want to be able to reach this audience. You don't want somebody else to dilute their attention with other bullshit. So now what's going to happen is you can basically make that email address like anonymized so that whenever you transact it somewhere, you're never actually giving away their email address. It stays in your possession. So if they come back at some point and I'm like, I hate the show, take me off your list, you can take me off knowing that, like, it's not anywhere else. And vice versa. You know that I know that my data is safe with you. And so these protocols, these trade lanes, they all require these hashed email addresses. So the downside of this is, in practice, you need to take all the data that you have that you can sell to advertisers, through the bidding process. You need to hash all those emails and phone numbers, store them with keys, and then be able to connect them to these protocols that occur through the normal programmatic processes. You use it through your Google Ad Manager or whatever ad server. For now, Google Ad Server. We'll see if it remains to be in their possession in the future or not.
The burden is on the publisher to collect information, in your example, email addresses, but you also said the outside phone number to work, stuff like that. The burden's on the publisher to collect it and hash it and then present it to store it, keep it updated all the time because,
Yep.
this isn't a one-time thing, hopefully. Hopefully you're continuing to collect new information about new visitors and then continually feed that to your advertiser or your advertiser company.
And don't worry, it gets harder because you not only that, you have to connect it to, so like LiveRamp has their own, they use a different hashing protocol than Trade Desk UUID. And so there's probably like more than 24 relevant protocol providers. Some of them use the same hashing, so it's really easy. But you have to connect these lists through them, and then you have to basically like sync them so that they're validated. So that, okay, like good, we've got matches for these. And then once you have that, you have to make sure that you've correctly stored those key values in your ad manager so that whenever those audience members hit your website, like they're identified. Now, here's the other hard part of that. So if I'm give you my email address, right, and I come back to your website, like, that's first party data. You have given it to you. But if I'm not logged in and if I'm, remember, cookies are gone. Like, how do you know it's me? Right? So I need to log in or perform some other act, which that's fine. Those key values and stores and stuff, it's like that can identify me in the same way. So that'll happen. But if I'm not logged in, like, what happens, right? Well, the answer is like, it kind of comes back to the thing we were talking about with email, where if I send you an email, everybody that's used an email marketing system, they have those short code variables where I can be like, hello, first name in brackets, you can do the same thing with your links. So all the links inside of your emails or links that you would put anywhere, you can basically you can create variables that are attached to all your contacts. So anywhere that you're able to do that sort of personalization, you can do the same thing with the links, and then also just the parameters for the URL. So what that does is, I don't have to be logged in. I click on, the, article in the email. As soon as I hit that page, bam, we know it's me, first party data, that auction takes place. And so that's how publishers are going to make the money, is off of those visitors. But the thing is like I was saying before about like how it actually works in practice. When you have first party data that's trafficked on your site, like, everybody should try to implement this to their best ability, everybody, because just having it implemented has a benefit. You'll see about we've seen it pretty consistently, at least 13 to 15% from all traffic, not just the matched ones. And again, it's because it's like that first party data is sort of like vouching for you with these exchanges and stuff. When it comes to filtering, they're like, look, this site has first party data. It's probably a higher quality audience. You're less likely to get denied or blocked when you're kind of going through these protocols and systems.
Interesting. And that's super valuable because it kind of parlays into my question I was about to ask. But it sounds like even just the act of doing it increases your earnings because it's a signal that you're a higher quality publisher, I guess.
Yeah.
And the big elephant in the room that comes to my mind is, we know that historically speaking, an average website will only be able to convert 1, 2, 3% of their visitors onto an email list. I know there are publishers who got really creative and really successful, And depending on the topic and the type of audience they attract, they can get maybe 5 or 10%. But that seems to usually be the exception to the rule. Normally your classic pop up is about a max 1% conversion rate. And with traffic dwindling, how does this all equalize? How does this all play out? Because it can take time for people listening to build up first party data, especially with traffic from organic search and from social media platforms and these other kind of more standardized traffic sources, with that kind of drying up a bit.
I'll give you the optimistic answer, which I'm normally a very optimistic person, and then but I'm also going to give you sort of what I would describe as the sort of honest and cynical answer. So the positive sort of optimistic one is that that's fine. Like, we already know the way that it works in practice. Like I said, um, you know, we make a product that makes this really easy for publishers, kind of so they don't have to manage all that stuff. But the truth is, you could use ChatGPT. This is all open stuff, so you could have ChatGPT walk you through how to do this, and you could get it done as a publisher. I'm pretty confident in that. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but you'd figure it out. So everybody should do it, just from the standpoint of, like I said, it makes your audience more valuable from the standpoint of like where it's trafficked across the web. It's just going to allow you to kind of like open up to competition. And it's, like if you do build an audience over time, it's going to make it more valuable. You're going to be able to work directly on selling that audience more valuable, all that kind of stuff. And so I think like the conversion rate and all that kind of stuff, I think, it takes time. That's fine. But I don't think, that's the amount or percentage of your audience that you have first party data on is not necessarily a prerequisite for needing to take advantage of this. I think everybody should, like I said, I think everybody should do this. It's philosophically where I think the market is headed. So I think it just puts you in line with where everything in the space is headed. Publishers, quite frankly, are really, really far behind. The fact that if you're hearing about this and I'm the one that's informing you about some of the details here that you didn't know, that's a tragedy, because everybody should know. And I keep finding that that's not the case. But there's no incentive. There's no party that's like, you know, this would be good for publishers. Like, advertisers, yes, there's so much time and effort put into this, but publishers, no. And right now, the only thing that's being put into this for publishers is just because the demand is so high from the advertising side. Agencies are having trouble like fulfilling campaigns, so they need more publishers. But this has led to something that actually is really crazy, which is, you mentioned conversion rates and stuff a second ago. Do you know what the number one growing segment in digital display is? Meaning the fastest growing sort of like, I guess, category of site that's, making money from programmatic display? E-commerce. E-commerce sites showing ads on login pages, showing ads at the bottom of, product pages, whatever, checkouts. And it's because they look at their data a ton, right? Like they know what their conversion rates are. They know when the ads do and don't affect, sales. So that's a fast growing segment. And partially it's because like the, advertisers need that to fill sort of like the demand that they've got. So publishers are a little far behind here. So that's a long way of me saying, like, the optimistic way of saying this is like everybody should do it, regardless of whether or not you're building a list fast or whatever. My cynical answer, and this is the honest one, if this is the advice that I follow, is what I would tell somebody, and it's that I would think about your business and what you offer people long and hard, because I would look at this like, imagine that all your traffic, everything, you're not going to get any help from anyone. No one's sending you any traffic. You need you need to offer something so valuable that it can be behind a paywall, it can be behind a gate, whatever. Because imagine that as long as your content is public, or whatever it is that you offer your audience, it's public. Imagine that somebody's going to either steal it. So if it's a commodity or something like that, they don't get it from you, and people don't care, then, like, tough. And then, the other side of that is, you need to be able to like make money from it as well. So I kind of look at this like, if I gated all my content and hid it away, like, I need to be able to generate the audience and the revenue from whatever I'm offering the audience, and it needs to be something that people want. Because, realistically, you don't really have an audience. You're borrowing an audience unless they're, they know whenever they're looking at your content, this is from you. they might not ever need to come back, but like you need to be able to have that, as something that you offer where people are going to find you for it. And so I think the answer to this for a lot of people is to like look at your product, and say, if I've relied for a long time off of, sort of like, you know, filling a need for Google, then, I would take another look at it and be like, is that need still going to exist? How can I fulfill it? And how can I be better than everybody else that potentially could? And yeah, that's the honest answer that I would have, because I think that one, if you can kind of look at things from that perspective, you'll solve all other future problems. Because if an audience comes to you directly because you're great, like Morning Brew has a great business, like really great business. People know it by name. It's like everybody's gold standard reference for newsletters. So, they've done something right there. And I think personality doesn't always have to be a part of that.
I got from you from a high level that it's less important to worry about how fast and how big your first party data list is, and more important to set it up to establish this as a model of thinking, and really to just shift the way you think about your content publishing to be more dynamic and to be more interesting. Is it worthy of living behind a paywall? That sort of thing. Um, how quickly do people need to adopt some of this mentality? Because you said at the beginning, you're like, it's a real risk for publishers to not understand what this
Yeah.
first party data looks like. So, like, how quickly does someone need to react to this, and what would the steps look like for someone over the next month or two to take to enter into this world and to prepare themselves for the future?
Yeah. And I think the answer to that is that um, realize that, like, if you're listening to the show, if you're reading about this stuff, it's something that you're interested in, you're in the minority of people in terms of like on the front end of hearing about different things, trends, market space, all that kind of stuff. The majority, when you look at the market as a whole, they're going to be behind the people that are sort of on the forefront listening to shows like this and kind of gathering information. So the good news is you could be totally behind the eight ball right now and not even on this path. And if you start today, you'll be okay. Because if you commit to it, like I said, this would be the advice that I would take. Um, and you have almost unlimited sort of like time, for the time being at least, to figure out how to make it work. You can just keep trying, right? Like there's no penalty for trying to build something, make content, whatever, that people like on the web. You can iterate and all that kind of stuff. So I would just say you're not late, but I would start right now, because every day that every day that you're late is a day that, potentially, something dramatic changes. I mean, I think I haven't seen digital change this much, this quickly, and maybe, since the iPhone. I remember like that being a big shift. And this seems to be along the same lines, maybe greater. So, you never know when something, all of a sudden Google is just going to completely get rid of the search engine as we know it and just put the chat interface up. I mean, that could happen tomorrow. How would that affect, your business? And I famously, a couple years ago, we do strategy sessions at Ezoic. And one of the things that we talk about is like, the future, our products, what do we want to think about? And I open the day by saying like, look, I think that people typing in their questions to an input box and getting back a list of websites seems antiquated. I don't think that users will tolerate that long term, and I would assume we need to like act accordingly, meaning like that's going to go away. And I would say the same thing to publishers. So just keep that in mind. Have that as a little bit of the fear that lives in the back of you, and let that motivate you to just, if you start. And I think if you don't have something that's collecting user emails or phone numbers on your website, like first ask yourself the question: do I have something that they would want to give me that for? Newsletters are really great. Like example of, you can just send your content out already. So I would set up the mechanisms to begin collecting that stuff. And then, as I've said on here already, is like, you might as well set up the sort of identity protocol so that you can traffic in this. So you can, for the same reason you want to email people to drive the traffic back to your site, you can also traffic in it directly. Both of these things, you don't even have to use them right now to set them up. And there's value in doing it for both. So I would just say that, yeah, if you're starting at a 0 point, like, first is make sure that your product aligns with something that people want. again, like there's a lot of testing to be done there. Figure out how, what is it that your audience wants? What can you convert them on? And then the second is like set up the roadways so that, in the future, if you have to, rainy day, power goes out, world's coming to an end, you can reach the people and create the resources that you need to keep your business alive.
Yeah, it reminds me of the head Chinese proverb, right? What's the best time to plant a tree 20 years ago? What's the second best?
Yeah. I mean, I
To,
almost said that whenever you said, when's the best time to start? I was like a couple years ago, but we all do with what we can. Don't have a time machine.
yeah. I'm going to ask, as we start to come to a close here, this has been so fascinating. I will say. This is really, I love when we get to just nerd out on some of these really techy details.
Me too. It's not most of the time I don't get to go this deep on different topics, so it's been fun. This is the kind of stuff that, yeah, I don't normally get to have these conversations.
Good. Well, this is the place to do it. I'll tell you, people love really getting into the details here. But I don't want to call it a non sequitur question, but maybe a little bit of a departure from what we've been talking about, but related. For a publisher, where does paid ads enter into the equation for first party data? Can it be used to quickly or quicker, in a quicker way to get first party data? Do you see a strategy there? Do you see paid ads be more important for publishers going forward in order to drive and control more traffic to build this out quicker? Or are they apples and oranges and not related?
Short answer to your question is yes, they are. There is a part to play, and what we've seen so far is I would describe it as what you. So arbitrage is like this dirty sort of like idea inside where, like I said before, it's really about, it's almost trying to game the system. Like I run ads and I make more money from, the visit than I do, like the money that I put into the ads. And this is thinking about it completely differently, because this is kind of thinking about it from almost the one ad network perspective, where what I want to do is advertise to get people to come back to my content, or advertise to get them to come to my site and subscribe. So you're trying, I mean, it's like any other business, like if I'm selling something online, in your case, it's content and the advertisers are going to pay for it. But like, I'm going to have to advertise it, and you may have to like target the right audience and stuff like that. You know better than anybody, because you actually have this list of your audience where you can be like, look, I know exactly everything about them. Let me go find some more people like this, run some ads. And you should be able to drive them to your site, and then be able to look at the data and say, okay, how many subscribers am I getting off of this? How much money am I making? And I don't think that it's I don't necessarily know that it's like the wholesale strategy for this, but the good news is that this was a strategy that was very bottom of the barrel, race to the bottom prior, and not something that was really recommended. And now with first party data, you can kind of look at this and say, okay, maybe I don't have enough audience right now, but I've got a good audience. It makes money. I just don't have the traffic that I want, and I can't get Google or whoever to send it to me. You can kind of look at this from the perspective of, you might go negative on ROI a little bit early on just to do some testing, but you should be able to get positive on something like this and be able to supplement, what you can't generate organically through advertising in that way. And my guess is that at the end of the day, when you look at the numbers, it probably comes out really similar to what's going on right now in terms of the premium that you're making off of your first party data in terms of bids and things like that is probably going to subsidize the difference in terms of like what you're losing by advertising. We've kind of seen that a little bit, and it's crazy how that works. But I think that that's just, advertising is like a living thing, like it's gonna survive. It's not going anywhere. It's not gonna die. And that money is not going to go back in the pockets of anybody. People's bonuses and stuff like that are all tied to it. So it's going to find a way to get spent, like to the same degree that it is before. And nobody's going back to TV and radio. So it's going into digital. So it's going to find a way.
I love it. Okay. There's a lot there to think about. As we come to a close, I want to give you a chance. I want to give you a chance in a sec to talk about kind of how Ezoic is kind of helping out in this area. But is there anything like I didn't ask you about that's really important to this topic, because you know a lot and we did get in the weeds, and I want to make sure like I didn't skip over something accidentally that's really important in the context of this conversation, especially for the type of person listening, the content creator, the online publisher, specifically around content, often as a model, but certainly the small business owner, right? We do have a lot of people listening that I'm glad you mentioned it, run e-commerce brands, run SaaS, these kind of things, like for that type of publishers. Anything we didn't touch on that was really important?
So I think the only thing that I would mention, and it's a plus one to starting now, it's that you can imagine a future in which if Google cuts off the siphon of traffic, and just in general, there's a lot less just general traffic going around. The people that will have built audiences that still have like considerable traffic that aren't like, the big tech platforms or LLMs, that's a lot smaller pool potentially. And with the way that these protocols are headed, you're developing a direct like line between you and advertisers, and that direct line might come in really handy when all of a sudden this pool is really small. you know Advertisers aren't having to worry, how do I get onto these millions of websites, these long tails, but rather, how do I make it onto the relevant places that actually have audiences. Again, remember what I said about advertising being a living thing, that money's going to go somewhere. So that's a lot of money that is being divided among millions right now that could be divided among thousands potentially in the future. And that's a lot more money for the sites that have maybe gotten this right and are able to sort of be like, look, I've got my audience for what it is. And, advertisers can work with you directly. You cut out a lot of middlemen. So I think that that's where, if you had to make me place a bet, I think that's where things are headed. So I would say, yeah, this aligning to that sort of view, I would say, yeah, at least in my perspective, I think is the way to go. And I think we've covered pretty much, all the reasons behind it and what to do about that.
It's really compelling. So I'll say that, it's hard to find a way to summarize what we just talked about. There's a lot there, but it makes sense when you think about it. And then as you talk about what we've learned from the past and what we see going forward, and certainly how it impacts publishers, like it really, there's a lot of clarity there. What, tell us a bit about specifically how Ezoic is handling all of this, and any insights from you guys at Ezoic as it relates to this.
Yeah, so we were really early on this. Again, Dwayne LaFleur, our founder, he's the smartest guy I've ever met in my life. I knew that whenever I talked to him, whenever he first kind of explained to me what Ezoic was, I liked the idea a lot, but I was also like, whatever this guy does, I'm in. You know what I mean? And a couple of years ago is when he first started talking about this, and so when we started building what we call ezID, ezID is basically, it's a system that allows you to just dump your list. So you can connect it to your MailChimp. You can just upload a static CSV file, however you want to do it. There's a billion ways. You just chuck your list in, or you connect your forms to it. It's really easy. And what it does is it hashes the emails, connects them to all the providers, stores them for you, keeps them private, keeps them in your possession, and then sets keys up and connects it immediately to Programmatic. So really all you're doing is uploading a list, and it does literally all the stuff that I was talking about earlier for you. I mentioned, like, this stuff is open. You could use ChatGPT and figure it all out. To be honest with you, I did it one day just based on that, and I did it, but some of our guys looked at it afterwards and they're like, well, those things aren't going to go through. That thing's not going to like actually get accepted. That's not valid. So, again, I can troubleshoot and figure that stuff out, but this is not a simple process. And we were really surprised that there was really nobody that was trying to make that easier for publishers. So we made ezID, and it's something that anybody that uses Ezoic can use. It's simple, easy to get set up with. But yeah, I would say that's our contribution in this space. And the one of the biggest things about it is, like, it's weird to me that there's nobody else that really seems to have even tried to do that. It's not like this super marvel of a technological accomplishment or all that proprietary. But I think it just goes to show that, like, a lot of the folks in advertising, that live as intermediaries. One of the things that's kind of a staple of it is that businesses go out of business. We're actually an old business in this space, being here over a decade, because what happens is the money is so good in there that, like, nobody wants to change. And when things change, rather than adapt, which is kind of hard sometimes, especially if you're the reason why the thing is getting adapted as a middleman, it's better just to, like, let the money dry up and then just walk away. And so you have a lot of lifestyle businesses in this space, and I think that sort of like thinking, short-term thinking, is why we don't really see anybody else trying to kind of like help solve this problem. Is that publishers are kind of in this space where no one is really pushing them to do this. even though it's in their best interest. And because of that, it's like, you're seeing most of the intermediaries and other players just being like, that's fine. We're not going to force it. It's kind of hard to do and it's hard to explain. So why would we try? We just look at things differently. I look at things differently. I would say this is the first time I'm both really excited about things in digital because I see change happening, change that we've all wanted, if we're honest with ourselves too. Like Google has been the rye of many people's sort of like complaints across, I would guess almost every listener at some point has had some kind of beef. And so they're being disrupted right now. But at the same time, it's disrupting you, me, all of us. And so that means that I have a healthy amount of fear and a healthy amount of, opportunistic opportunity or optimistic opportunity that, I'm excited about as well. So, yeah, I think just generally taking that perspective on it, where it's like having a healthy amount of fear, I think is the right approach. And, I think that's what we try to do is we try to build things that, support you in that. And yeah, we'll continue to.
Yeah, it's funny how change often is necessitated by maybe a step back before you take 2, 3 steps forward. And
Yeah.
in hindsight, it always is kind of obvious, right? It's like, well, yeah, this needed a shakeup, took a step back, propelled growth, change, etc. But when you're in the middle of it, it doesn't always happen at the same hindsight.
Yeah, I mean, change. There's a reason why people are just kind of naturally resistant to it, and I think this space there's a lot of big, powerful things. Things in terms of when I say big and powerful, I just mean money that's consolidated in different areas, and it doesn't like money doesn't like to move. It doesn't like to be uncertain, and it's being forced to right now, and I think that's why you're seeing these sort of like big shifts. I mean, I never thought, having worked with Google as a partner for a long time, I never thought I would see them knee-jerk reaction some of the things that they have, I feel like, over the last year. And I don't think that that's done. I think that they felt like that they were leading for a really long time in an area, and all of a sudden they were trailing, and now they're trying to catch up or convince us that they've caught up. And I'm not sold fully yet. And meanwhile, they've got a lot of like ghosts from the past that are coming back to haunt them. And so I would say they're in the toughest place of anybody right now.
Well, we'll get a link there so people can go check out kind of some of the stuff Ezoic's doing and see how that might impact their business. I think that you guys are clearly thinking this through, and it's a lot. So if you're listening and that was a lot, maybe give yourself a little break, listen to it again, try it out second time. I know that was really detailed. Tyler, thanks for coming on. It's been a long time.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's been a long time coming, and I'm glad to have you on. I feel like we waited for a really good topic to get into,
Yeah.
really deep on it, which I'm really glad about. I know I'm going to listen to this one again to make sure I have a good understanding of it. So thanks again. Appreciate you sharing. And until we talk again.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Jared. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for everybody that listened through it. Hopefully it's helpful. And yeah, you can follow me on X. That's where I'm probably the most active. I do talk about this stuff on there. So if it's something you're interested in, you can follow me there. If it's not, that's fine. You can just burn this one and chalk it up too. Hopefully, I don't have to listen to that guy anymore. But yeah, hopefully it was interesting to everybody. And thanks again for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Tyler. Appreciate it.
Hey everyone, Spencer here, founder of Niche Pursuits. So you probably know the importance of building internal links so your site can perform well in Google. Today I want to share how Link Whisper can help you add outbound internal links to your articles. As you draft your article in WordPress, Link Whisper scans your site, identifying the best internal link opportunities. It then recommends the perfect anchor text and link to add. With just a click, your content is updated with new internal links. No more expensive tools or tedious manual site searches. Link Whisper does the heavy lifting right inside the WordPress editor. Say goodbye to the hassle of internal linking. With Link Whisper, you can focus on what you do best, creating great content. Use the coupon code podcast today and get $15 off. Elevate your website's internal linking with Link Whisper now. Building smart internal links just got easier. Go to linkwhisper.com today and be sure to use coupon code podcast to get $15 off.